We should be good to go.
Great, thank you. Just get us to the right screen. Good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Carbon Credits in 5 Questions. We're pleased to have you join us today. Today's session will be recorded and made available to watch afterwards on albertacarbonhub.com and the Carbon Management Canada YouTube channel. We'll just do a brief review of our agenda. We'll kick off today's session by welcoming you and our guest speaker to the webinar. We'll do a quick introduction and then dive right into our top 5 questions about carbon credits. We'll wrap up the webinar with your questions, so please do type them throughout the session in the meeting chat or the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to them after the presentation. So before we begin our introductions, I have a quick poll for you to answer. So Kaylin, if you can start the poll, that would be fantastic. So once those questions pop up on your screen, please take a moment to answer them. And once you've completed your answers, make sure to click submit, and then we'll be able to capture your feedback. So we're looking to find out how familiar you are with the CCUS industry and its role in carbon credits. And there's a range of selections for you there. We'd also like to know how interested you are in learning about CCUS and carbon credits in particular. And then just some demographic information we're collecting from you, kind of what your background is. So which of the following best describes your current involvement with the energy or CCUS sector? Whether or not you work in the sector, you're a student or researcher, or perhaps you live in Canada and would like to learn more, or perhaps you're from outside of the country and also are just interested in learning more about CCUS. And once you've made your selections there, please click submit and we'll capture your feedback. So thanks for doing that today. My name is Tamara Gale. I'm the Senior Marketing and Communications Manager for Carbon Management Canada. I have spent much of my career telling stories on behalf of Canada's energy industry, with a focus most recently on jobs and careers in the energy industry, and in particular, working in the emerging CCUS sector. I am the host of Carbon Management Canada's CCUS webinar series, and I'm a co-host of Not Your Grandpa's Energy Industry podcast, which you can check out anywhere you get your podcasts. I'd like to welcome and introduce JP Jepp, our guest speaker for today's webinar. Welcome, JP.
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks, Tamara.
JP is the founder and principal of Nexus Climate and Energy Strategy. And JP's list of previous roles includes regulatory lead for the Shell Quest Carbon Capture and Storage Project, Senior Advisor on Climate Change to the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change through the development of Canada's first National Climate Change Plan, Corporate Lead on Climate Change in the Regulatory Affairs Team for Shell Canada, Director of Energy Transitions for ATCO Group, and Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Enhance Energy, founder of the Alberta Carbon Trunkline. JP was corporate lead in development of 2 quantification protocols for inclusion in the Alberta Emission Offset System and is on the technical expert team supporting Environment and Climate Change Canada in the development of quantification protocols for inclusion in federal regulatory systems. So JP has serialized, verified, and marketed over a megaton of credits in the Alberta regulatory systems. So lots of experience in this area, especially given that JP worked on our one of our first existing carbon storage projects. So JP is now founder and principal of Nexus Climate and Energy Strategy, a consultancy supporting companies and governments with climate change and energy transition topics. So JP, thanks for joining us today. We're happy to have you here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
So carbon credits are a new and emerging area of Canada's industrial GHG emissions reduction efforts. There are lots of questions about what carbon credits are, how they operate, and what it means for tangible emissions reduction in Canada and globally. So we're here to help clarify some of those questions on carbon credits. So JP, let's dive right in and start at the beginning. Perhaps you can help us understand just what are carbon credits?
For sure. So carbon credits are something we hear about often within climate change space, within industry, and read about in the general press. But really, what are they? It's become a bit of an intangible. But what are carbon credits? Well, first, they are a market-based mechanism. There's a buyer of credits, and there's a seller of credits. And typically, the buyer wants to obtain some credits because they have a desire to limit their greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a large emitting facility or a company with greenhouse gas emissions they're looking to address, either because they have a regulatory obligation to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and want to use those carbon credits as part of their approach to address their GHG emissions, or they have voluntary targets. They're not required to reduce their GHG emissions, but as a corporation, they have internal targets that they've made public. So typically, facilities and organizations have two very broad options to reduce those greenhouse gases: either reduce their emissions directly via some capital project or other effort they do to reduce their GHG, or buying credits. And the credits are somebody else having reduced their greenhouse gas emissions and having those emissions quantified and serialized and turned into a credit that can then be bought. And those carbon credits represent real, demonstrable, verified greenhouse gas emission reductions. So they have value to the company or the organization that buys them.
Okay, that's good to know. So, it's interesting that companies can reduce their GHG emissions through a system where they might take on GHG emission reduction efforts themselves within their organization, or that there's this opportunity for them to leverage reductions that other organizations have made,
Mhm.
thereby, kind of achieving reductions through, through a combination of methods. It sounds like it's quite a robust system that way.
Yeah, it is. The one of the great things about credits is it enables some flexibility. So it gives the facility or the company options. Again, as long as those credits do indeed represent real and demonstrable GHG reductions, then that company has flexibility in order to meet their regulatory obligation or their internal voluntary targets. So, yeah, well, it's one of the best attributes of credits is it enables flexibility.
Okay, that's good to know. So oh, I missed one of our slides here. Um, so they can, um, these carbon credits are part of a system where they can be additional or, or incremental as we say here, or cumulative, where they add up and they can stack them, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some general elements or attributes of different types of carbon credits. So first of all, the GHG reductions that are behind those credits need to be incremental. So that is GHG, the facility that is generating or the organization that's generating the greenhouse gas emission reductions is doing so beyond what they would regulatorily be required to do. So it's incremental GHG reductions. Second, additional, those emission reductions would not have occurred without the ability to generate the credits. The credits themselves and the ability to generate credits because of greenhouse gas reductions and then to sell those to market is really important. And to do that, we utilize a baseline and then the project itself and compare those two. So again, they need to be additional. Those reductions would not have occurred without the ability or opportunity to generate the credits themselves. Thirdly, really, really importantly, those greenhouse gas reductions that are represented by the credits themselves need to be verified. There needs to be a third party that comes in, takes a look at the math, takes a look at the facility, takes a look at the effort that was made to indeed reduce the greenhouse gases, and then sign off on it. It's a bit of an audit process. And to take that further, those greenhouse gas emission reductions need to be quantified. And typically there's a methodology or a protocol is the word often used to calculate those greenhouse gas emissions that have been reduced or avoided or removed in some cases. So those carbon credits are really robust and they need to be. They need to represent an incremental, an additional, a quantified, and a verified GHG reduction, a true environmental benefit.
Okay. That's it does sound like a very detailed system. For
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, it needs to be. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's think about perhaps we can share what are the types of carbon credits just to give some understanding to how this might work in practice.
For sure. Yeah. So again, the word carbon credits gets utilized in general media and press and general conversation. And it actually represents a whole lot of different other types of credits. So carbon credits is sort of an umbrella term, and there's all sorts of credits that are generated in national systems and subnational systems and voluntary systems, and they all are carbon credits, but there's lots of different types. So these are just a few that I've put in this slide here, and I'll just touch on some of these briefly to give the audience a little taste. So the surplus credits. Oh,
Oh, did I go back?
that's
Sorry,
okay.
JP.
No worries, no worries. Yeah. So surplus credits are in the federal offset system. They represent GHG reductions by facilities beyond what they would have been required to do under obligation. Clean fuel regulations are also in the federal system under the Clean Fuel Regulation, and they represent greenhouse gas emission reductions in the transportation system. Likewise, LCFS credits or low carbon fuel standard credits are in British Columbia and also represent GHG reductions inside the transportation system in that province. Voluntary offset credits are credits in a voluntary registry or voluntary system outside of compliance and again represent real verifiable greenhouse gas emission reductions that have been done voluntarily. Carbon removal certificates are net greenhouse gas emission reductions from the atmosphere, which is a new space and growing space. Offset credits or offset units is utilized quite a lot. It represents greenhouse gas emission reductions by parties that are not obligated to do so. It's outside of regulatory obligation. Likewise, emission performance credits are an awful lot like surplus credits inside Alberta. It's facilities or regulated parties that reduce greenhouse gases more than they're required to do and turn that extra effort into a verified credit. CCUS credits or carbon capture, utilization, and storage credits are carbon credits generated inside carbon capture projects. emission performance units are Ontario, and earn credits are BC. So these are all carbon credits, but of course they're all very different. And back to the previous slide, they all represent real, demonstrable, verified greenhouse gas emission reductions.
So it sounds like there have been different developments in different provinces across Canada, and perhaps not even, you've talked about BC, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, but we maybe haven't talked about some other provinces. It sounds like there's still ongoing development in this area across Canada.
Yeah, for definitely. So the provinces here in Canada are all of Canada. The large emitting facilities are required to address and to reduce their greenhouse gas emission reductions. Some provinces have their own climate change and large emitter regulatory system for reducing greenhouse gases, and some provinces and territories utilize a federal system. But
Okay.
all greenhouse gas emissions are tracked, and there is a reduction obligation on regulated large emitting facilities.
Okay. And JP, I found it interesting too when you were talking about the difference, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit more between what companies do to comply with regulations where they're required to reduce emissions and where they might have programs where they participate in more voluntary emissions reductions, perhaps as part of their, environmental, social, and governance practices or a corporate responsibility program.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe that's a great opportunity to go to the next slide.
Okay.
So in broad terms, I'm going to all those different types of carbon credits from the last slide might be able to drop them into two broad buckets. So compliance credits are carbon credits that have been generated within a regulatory compliance system. So the federal OBPS system, it's called right now, or and the federal government, or Alberta's also got a tier regulation. BC's got regulatory approach, and as I said, there are a few of the provinces that have their own climate change and large emitter regulatory systems, and credits that are generated and utilized as compliance within regulated systems are called compliance credits broadly. And most of the credits on the last slide would probably drop into that compliance credits
Okay.
box.
Hmm.
Voluntary credits are credits that are generated outside of the compliance system and traded, transacted outside of the voluntary system. And you're right, primarily utilized by companies and facilities that are trying to show a reduction in their environmental impact and their greenhouse gas emissions outside of that compliance system. So to meet internal targets that they might want to show to their stakeholders or shareholders.
Sounds good. JP, I noticed in the chat that we're having some trouble with our slides, so I'm just going to pause for a minute and perhaps reshare the slides to see if that fixes the problem. So
Fantastic.
just bear with us one moment while we deal with our technical issues, and we'll get started again. Okay, so hopefully everyone is seeing the slides now, um, and this is where we left off, just talking about the compliance credits versus the voluntary credits, uh, and and as JP said, it's the credits tend to fall into one of those two categories.
Really broad general terms, you bet. Yeah, the different compliance systems, national, subnational, some subnational groups like in the United States, there are some states that have joined together. We have Quebec and California that are joined together in a compliance regulatory system. all of those would drop into the compliance box, the credits that are generated and utilized within those systems. And then there's other voluntary registries and credits that are generated into those voluntary registries. We can put it in a voluntary box.
Okay. And just for some clarity, JP, the voluntary system operates both within Canada and internationally. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. There are uh, most definitely some projects inside Canada that are generating voluntary credits and selling those to different parties around the globe on the voluntary registries. So Canada-based projects, I would say, are principally generating or buying credits underneath the compliance obligations within either the provincial or a federal system. But yeah, different carbon credit projects always have the opportunity to find a methodology or a protocol that I spoke about
Mhm.
that details how to quantify the greenhouse gas emission reductions and then can monetize or turn that environmental effort into credits and sell those around the globe.
Okay. So maybe we can dig into a little more detail about how carbon credits in the system works in Alberta.
Definitely. So as I just said, there are lots of opportunities for Alberta-based projects to generate credits, and there are Alberta-based companies and facilities with a regulatory obligation that need to source credits. And so these are I put in this slide here, these are the principal types of credits that are being generated or utilized in Alberta. So first of all, the Alberta regulatory system for greenhouse gases is known as TIER, Technology, Innovation, and Emissions Reduction Regulation. And of course, there are some credits that can be generated and then utilized as eligible compliance underneath that tier
Mhm.
regulation. The two biggest types are offset credits, and those offsets are credits that have been generated by parties that are not regulated. So a good example of that would be the wind turbine in the background there. That facility will not, of course, have a greenhouse gas emission reduction, but you can quantify and verify and turn the wind facility, the greenhouse gas emission reductions, and turn that into offset credits. The other key type of credits underneath the tier regulatory system is EPC, or an emission performance credit. And that is a greenhouse gas emission reduction that I say is above and beyond the call of duty or above and beyond the regulatory requirement for that facility to reduce emissions. That extra effort can be quantified and verified and turned into an EPC. And offset credits and EPCs are equally fungible and usable as compliance underneath the Alberta regulatory system.
Okay.
Another type is there's a federal large emitter system as well. The facilities in Alberta are not are not underneath that greenhouse gas emission reduction
Mhm.
requirements federally, but there are some opportunities for Alberta-based projects to generate offsets that can be utilized inside that federal system. Likewise, there are some facilities inside Alberta that are regulated under the clean fuel regulation, a federal regulation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from gasoline and diesel. And there
Mhm.
are opportunities for Alberta-based projects to generate credits that are eligible as compliance underneath that clean fuel regulation.
Okay.
And thirdly, there's voluntary offset credits. Again, those are credits by facilities outside of regulation and can be generated inside voluntary registries and sold to parties across the globe. And fourth is a type of credit or certificate that I'm very interested in these days. It's called carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. It is a net reduction of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere rather than less greenhouse gases going to atmosphere. And all of these, there are projects right now that are either generating these or utilizing the credits that are made via these projects inside Alberta.
So it sounds like there's a combination of sort of using the market and also organizations, developing, say, innovation and technology to reduce the emissions themselves. So I imagine that's a big focus for a lot of projects across Alberta currently.
Very definitely. Yeah, innovation is a great word and a real focus. All greenhouse gas emission reductions require employment of some large capital equipment, large facilities, and um, most definitely putting forward a really good foot trying to reduce environmental impact.
I see a question in the chat. We normally would wait until the end to get to these, but just it applies so well to what we were just talking about, and we're wondering what the difference is between credits and certificates, as we've sort of indicated on this slide.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, great question. I would say for the most part, it's just they're synonyms. Potato, potato, credit, certificate. I do sometimes see carbon dioxide removal credits, and I also see sometimes carbon dioxide removal certificates. It might just be a little bit of marketing trying to show that CDR credits are somehow a little bit different from offset credits. But
Right.
great question. Potato, potato, synonym.
Okay, sounds good. Great. Well, let's take a look at our question 4 here. So, how does a carbon credit system such as this, that has, this broad application in the way that it operates, how does it help Alberta reduce emissions?
Yeah, great question. So if we're going to have a full credit system, how does it help Alberta? That has to be the base focus here. So most of all, it helps facilities, regulated facilities inside Alberta, meet their greenhouse gas emission reduction commitments. So to meet regulation, again, the tier regulation inside Alberta, there are a number of compliance options that regulated facilities have. Reduce your emissions, buy emission performance credits, buy offset credits. And so by sourcing the offset credits and the emission performance credits, the credits that are eligible underneath tier, it just helps those facilities meet their reduction obligations. Principally, and really importantly, in sourcing credits, that often means that is at a lower cost to comply than reducing emissions at the facility itself. Sometimes it could be a facility that's either hard to abate, like it's very hard to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions because it's a processed CO2, or it's just really expensive relatively expensive relative to other options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the facility. So by sourcing credits and most likely at a lower cost than reducing themselves, it is reducing the overall cost of compliance, but it's still compliance, and that's the really important part. And thirdly, for the facility that is generating the credits, that company, that facility would have to put forward some capital cost, put forward a large capital abatement project in order to generate those carbon credits. And by being able to quantify the GHG emission reductions and sell and have that revenue come back to them, it pays for the project itself. It helps it address that large capital cost. So the system, the market as a whole, works and has helped Alberta facilities and Alberta companies reduce their greenhouse gas emissions for a couple of decades now already.
Yeah, interesting. And when we talk about companies that need to reduce their emissions and have requirements to do so, what kind of industries are looking at participating in this carbon credit system to do that?
Oh, so there is so a large emitter is a facility that uh, emits greenhouse gases above a certain threshold. So,
Okay.
and large emitters in Alberta, large emitting facilities include chemicals production, oil and gas production, cement facilities, lots of industry inside Alberta, hydrogen production, others, lots of large emitters inside Alberta, electricity production. And so there's a fairly long list inside Alberta that have a regulatory obligation and either need to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions by employing a project on site and at the facility and or sourcing carbon credits in order to address their emission reduction obligations.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. So we talked a little bit about what carbon credits are, how they operate here in Alberta, how they help us reduce emissions and perhaps meet our emission reduction targets within the province, and of course contributing to Canada's emissions reductions. So this sounds like quite a robust system with people who work in a variety of different areas within it. So it seems like there are those who may work for companies who are figuring out how to participate in the carbon credit system. And we have some workers who are probably working on the regulatory side where they're determining how do we design a program so that we can, make carbon credits work for industry. And then, as you said, JP, there's a whole voluntary system, which sounds like it has reaches beyond just Canada. There's a lot of international opportunity there. Um, so this sounds like quite a robust system that likely has a lot of career opportunities within it.
Definitely, yeah. And this is something I've seen. I've seen the growth through my career, and we're just starting. So in my Alberta was one of the very first jurisdictions globally that had a greenhouse gas emission reduction regulation and that stood up a market system for the generation and trade and transaction of credits. And so through my career, I've seen the sector grow and the number of opportunities within that space, and we're just starting. We're going to need a lot more credits on a forward basis to bring down the overall societal greenhouse gases. So broadly speaking, here's a few of the general roles and job opportunities that I can see in the space. First of all, at the facility, at the company that would be generating the greenhouse gas emission reductions. There's leaders, there's project specialists that really understand the greenhouse gas emission reduction project and the generation of credits, and those are quite often engineers and folks that are great with credit generation and management and quantification. And I'm not an engineer. I would be more of the second type. Through my career, I've had the opportunity to work with the generation, verification, and marketing of credits.
Mhm.
But yeah, at the facility, there needs to be real leaders that really understand these capital projects. Then once the project is up and running, There's something called origination. There's originators that their principal role is the creation and the marketing of those credits on behalf of the facility and the company that's making the greenhouse gas emission reductions. There's credit brokers that, as you might imagine, the word broker, they bring
Yeah.
together the buyer and the seller, and they support the transaction, and sometimes are buyers themselves. On the other end, on the buying end, you need credit procurers that really
Mhm.
understand the market and the opportunities and different forms of credits and who might be selling and pricing and other things. And one of the most important parts of the whole system, I would say, is the verification. Again, there needs to be a really robust quantification of the environmental benefit of the greenhouse gas reduction, and some people that understand how to verify that those emission reductions happen and according to the protocols or methodologies. And those are verified. Like, we'll be on site with hard hats and checking out the facility itself and reports and putting a stamp and a review of that emission reduction project. Once all of that is done, there needs to be a registry, either a government registry or a voluntary registry, where the emission reduction proponent submits all the paperwork on their project, and that generates the credits themselves. And so
Mhm.
those registries act as the platform, I say, for generating the credits and then for tracking the transaction on those credits. And lastly, and really importantly, there needs to be in government for the compliance systems like TIER in Alberta. You need good people inside government that really understand the details of the system and supporting the generation of protocols and the generation of credits. And in many cases, it's the government persons in Canada, inside the federal system or the subnational, provincial, and territorial systems that really help make the full system work.
Great. JP, I think we lost you a little bit when you were talking about verification. Can we just maybe do touch on that again, just in case we missed anything in terms of your explanation? I think you were talking about verifiers, perhaps doing site visits, and that part of their role is really to check in and make sure that organizations that the emissions reductions they're reporting are actually being done.
Definitely. Yeah. So verifiers are the people that verify that indeed the greenhouse gas emission reduction has occurred. And to do so, it can't just be at a desktop in front of a computer. Verifiers typically need to go to the facility that is the project that would be generating the greenhouse gas emission reduction. So going to the refinery that has put in a large cogen facility, taking a look at the metering, and really going through with a fine-tooth comb a bit of an on-site audit. And so verifiers really need to be comfortable with being on site and with hard hats and on-site materials. And they also need to be good with computers and making reports. And so it's a really specialized field. Verifiers are really, really important to the full system.
Well, it sounds like there's lots of opportunity across the spectrum, lots of different roles, kind of in almost like a different area for every interest or skill set in some ways.
Yeah.
And JP, I know knowing we were going to be having this conversation, we did a little bit of research and looked at our some information our friends at Careers in Energy have put together. And what we found was given these roles that you've described and what we think is needed within this sector, the types of people who might do well in these roles or might be interested in these roles are probably problem solvers who can be who are analytical and can think critically about issues and systems and apply those. So they likely have good judgment and decision-making abilities, and probably most of all are very detail-oriented, I imagine.
Agreed.
So,
Yeah, that great skills to have.
and in some cases, for instance, when we're talking about brokers, those who might be negotiating market transactions, they likely need to be able to develop strong interpersonal relationships and have good communication skills, both written and oral. Um, there's room in this industry to be innovative and creative, and certainly given the fact that this industry is growing and changing as we speak, workers in this area likely need to be responsive and adaptable.
Definitely.
So I think workers in these roles are trailblazers in a sense. They must be comfortable with a rapidly evolving environment, be flexible and responsive to change, and perhaps be comfortable working in an area that uh, that is still developing. So there could be some degrees of uncertainty, and they might need to be comfortable with that um, in their role. So there is an opportunity here, I think, for being that the space around carbon credits is new. Workers in this sector can have an opportunity to get in on the ground floor and learn and explore the environment as they grow and perhaps develop their career as a leader in the space, gaining some experience um, as they go, building knowledge through these periods of growth.
Absolutely. Yeah, every forecast that I see is showing that the need for credits and the use of credits in order to address climate change is going nowhere but up. So yeah, if there's people watching this right now that feel they might be able to fit into one of these roles or have some of those skills or traits, absolutely, it'd be great to see them in this space.
And very important to recognize that skills can be transferable. JP, you mentioned yourself that you've had quite the career journey and you've worked in many different roles using what you've learned and applying your experience to the next challenge.
Definitely, yeah. The skills, the knowledge, the experience that people in this space and in the credit sector will be able to put in their toolbox as they start their careers here are very applicable in other scenarios too. So it's not it's niche in many ways that some depth, knowledge, and experience is really helpful in this space, but the tools that people that take on carbon credit roles will be able to put into their resume are very applicable in other places too.
That's great. Well, that's carbon credits in 5 questions. And although we did say that we would tackle this topic in 5 questions, it is a very new space to be in, and I think people do have a lot of questions. So I just wanted to check in with those on the call today and see what questions they might have as well that we haven't covered. So we have one here, which is talking about the voluntary carbon market, and just wondering what level of trust there may be within that market. And I guess that could apply theoretically to companies who are buying those credits, and perhaps it applies to the regulatory system as well, as you said, maybe verifying that those credits um, are tangible and real.
Definitely, yeah, and this has always popped up since carbon credit markets have first been established, and there will always be this. And I see the question of whether credits are indeed real to be a great question because if they're not, then we're utilizing them in order to address climate change without basis. So I think it's fine and good that we have checks from time to time on whether the credits that are being utilized inside voluntary or compliance systems do indeed have the environmental basis. So as we talked about in the slides and in the presentation, credits need to be real, incremental, so beyond what would have otherwise been required. They need to be additional, so the credits themselves help bring about the project, and they most definitely need to be quantified and verified. And so if there isn't that robust check on whether the credits are there, then people start to question whether those credits indeed have environmental basis. So yeah, I think it's good that people are always looking to check to see whether these credits do indeed meet all those criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, it sort of underpins the system. If the credits um aren't real or trusted, then they're not doing what they're intended to be doing. So that's a great
Precisely.
question.
Yeah.
Um, so another question we have are how many markets currently exist in Canada, and is it possible to negotiate between these markets? So I think that likely is referring to the voluntary credit space.
Yeah. So voluntary credits. So how many credits markets are there currently in Canada? Well, there's and this is the same in different countries around the world too. There are often a few different markets within any jurisdiction that are overlapping, and there's opportunities for different credit markets. So in Canada, we've got our federal offset system, the federal clean fuel regulations, and then in each of the provinces, there's sometimes their own systems. So there's an Alberta regulatory system, a BC large emitter regulatory system, a Saskatchewan large regulatory system. So there's, without putting a number on it, there's many. Provincial or territorial and federal, and they're all in the same space at the same time. And then on top of that, there's another box, the voluntary system as well. Projects always have the opportunity to generate a voluntary credit using a voluntary protocol. So without putting an absolute number on it, somewhere around 25 or under, if you're taking a look at all the different credit systems inside Alberta and other parts of Canada. And do they interact? For the most part, no. And that is something that has popped up a number of times through my career. Wouldn't it be nice if a credit could be generated inside Alberta and be utilized for compliance inside Saskatchewan, or vice versa, or
Right.
sold in New Brunswick or others? And we might get there at some point, but for the most part right now, no, those different credit systems don't interact.
Okay, so the carbon credits need to be generated where your project um, exists.
Definitely. Yeah. So carbon credits inside the Alberta tier regulatory system need to be both generated and utilized within Alberta, and likewise for other provinces as well.
Okay. And we do have a question from someone asking if you have a recommendation for any resources or literature that they could um, learn more about carbon markets.
Oh boy, great question. I would seek out persons within the space that looks most interesting to you. So all those different roles might be interesting to different people. So somebody might be real interested in being a verifier, having the opportunity to go out to site and then typing up reports about what you've seen. Some might be very interested to be in the markets, and some might want to just be a champion inside their own organization. So to learn more, I would say seek out professionals that are already doing that
Yeah.
within this space. There's inside Alberta and inside other parts of Canada. There's great brokers. There's great verifiers and others. And I would start by doing an internal assessment on which of those roles might be most interesting to you, and then seek out some folks within that space.
Yeah. It's a great way to learn from those who are sort of in doing the work currently, because it is, as you say, a new space. Um, that could be a really great way to connect and also build your network, which never hurts when
So,
it comes to um,
awesome.
to job opportunities, or even just to expand your own knowledge for your own interests. So
Yeah.
that's a great suggestion. And I suppose there are some tools out there that help us connect with others in a professional way, LinkedIn being one of the primary, and probably a very effective way to perhaps do a little bit of research and find people who are working in this area. Might also be a great place to find information or articles that people are sharing about the carbon credit space as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, JP. That looks like those are the questions we have for today. So thanks to our participants for sending in those great questions. That was really, really helpful. So before we wrap up, Kaylin, if we could just launch the remainder of our survey. So could our participants today please take a moment to answer the questions that are going to pop up on your screen? That would be much appreciated. Your feedback will help us produce great events for you going forward. So we'd like to know if how well we did today with the overall quality of the webinar content. So we hopefully provided a good level of information for you. If you can make a selection there. How valuable was the information to you in the webinar today? Hopefully it answered the questions that you have about carbon credits.
Yeah.
And could the potential of carbon credits in the carbon capture, utilization, and storage sector inspire a career change for you? So did our discussion today make you think perhaps about either exploring working in with carbon credits within the sector, or at least want to learn more about it? And is there more you'd like to learn about the CCUS industry and carbon credits in Alberta? And once you've answered those questions, if you could click submit at the bottom of your screen, we would appreciate that. Great. JP, thank you so much for joining me today and tackling our top 5 questions on carbon credits. The information you shared has helped me better understand how carbon credits work, and hopefully has done that for our viewers as well. Carbon Management Canada has been working with the Government of Alberta to develop a library of resources on the carbon capture, utilization, and storage sector. Today's webinar is just one of the educational resources available. So please do visit the albertacarbonhub.com to access more content like this and to expand your knowledge of Alberta's CCUS sector. We'd like to thank you for joining us today, and thanks once again to JP for shedding some light on carbon credits. We hope you
Thanks for
enjoyed
inviting me.
today's webinar. Yeah, thanks, JP. Thanks so much for the information. I think it was very informative for everyone today.
Absolutely. My
So
pleasure. Thanks.
take care, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us.